I'm so happy to announce the following guest on stage. Even though she's only 31 years old, this climate justice activist campaigns against fossil fuels, crossed the Atlantic on a sailboat, and with her debut book, It's Not Just You, she was shortlisted for the Wainwright Prize. What a powerful lady is coming on stage. Put your hands together for Tori Tu. Hello, Tori. So nice to have you here in a super busy schedule. You're quite a climate activist, no? Could you maybe tell us where does it come from, your engagement, your activism?
Yeah, I think like a lot of us, we started caring about the climate from a young age, and I don't think that should be a precursor to taking action for the climate, but in my case, that was my story. I grew up in a small fishing town in the northeast of Hong Kong, and I spent a lot of time living on the water on my dad's boat and bearing witness to increasing number of typhoons, environmental degradation. Hong Kong, ironically, despite having this very strong image of a cosmopolitan, bustling city, was a city full of biodiversity. Only 25% of the land is developed, but that number kept increasing. And I think seeing that as a child growing up, I felt a very deep sense of injustice, and I primarily focused on conservation efforts. But then I think as I started learning more about the climate crisis and the relationship between the fossil fuel industry, increasing carbon emissions, temperatures going up, that spurred on my climate action and led to where I am today.
Yeah, and there's definitely, so the relationship between your mental health and the climate is very strong, and that's what you write about in your book. It's not just you, it's about eco-anxiety. So maybe just very shortly, what's eco-anxiety?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues with the term eco-anxiety is that it has so many different definitions, and that can make it quite difficult to pin down, I suppose, your relationship to climate change, and also create a broader sort of diagnoses and like treatment options for people, if we even want to say that it's something that needs to be treated. Because I argue actually it's a very adaptive response to very unnatural circumstances we're going through. And there are definitions that range from calling it a chronic fear of environmental doom. The suffix of anxiety implies that people are anxious in response to the climate crisis. But the definition that I like the most is by the Climate Psychology Alliance, which calls it the mental, somatic, and emotional distress in response to dangerous changes in the climate system. And the reason why I like that is because it's broad enough. It talks about not only the mental impacts, but the physical impacts, because I feel like, and this is something I write about in the book, that there's a huge disservice to focusing on this futurity element of climate change. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of emphasis of people's well-being in response to fears of the future. But what that does is it detracts from the environmental defenders and frontline activists who have been experiencing generational trauma at the hands of extractive systems that go hand in hand with the climate crisis. I'm talking about indigenous resistance against the fossil fuel industry. I'm talking about land grabbing. I'm talking about the social injustices that come from being an environmental defender. For instance, Colombia, which is a place that I had the privilege of living for 4 months, is the most dangerous place to be an environmental defender, where people, specifically indigenous people, are routinely murdered for their activism. And does that not fall under the category of mental health in response to climate change? So I feel like there is a danger sometimes with eco-anxiety being very Eurocentric. It's not something that only affects people in Europe, it's a worldwide thing, but the book was designed to make sure that we really unpack the breadth of emotional distress in response to climate change.
And the book you wrote about, you really want to shift away from eco-anxiety, you're suffering fear, and it's your own responsibility.
Absolutely.
You really want to shift away from that, and we need to look at it from a broader perspective.
Right. It often makes me laugh thinking about when I was younger and I had very crippling eco-anxiety. You mentioned that I sailed across the Atlantic, and it's funny because at the time, I was a youth climate activist, I was very eco-anxious, and I had been told that the best thing to do for my eco-anxiety was to take action, to go spend time in nature, and that involved sailing across the Atlantic. And the funny thing is, after I did that, I was still incredibly eco-anxious. I did everything that it said on the tin, like go outside, do this, do that. And I still have eco-anxiety, and the whole point of it is not to get rid of it. I do think that living with it is something we have to make peace with, because it is telling us to essentially be aware of the circumstances that we're in. It's very much, our response to the physical environment around us and the social environment. But the reason why I say that, in the book I write that we need to kind of divest from this individualism, our own fault that we're suffering from eco-anxiety, is because we wouldn't have these experiences if it were not for the big corporations that are literally destroying the planet. And so my rhetoric and my sort of plea to people is to really think about eco-anxiety from this systemic lens of, okay, which industries are destroying the planet, which industries are putting profit before people, which industries are keeping me up, awake at night. And one of those industries is the fossil fuel industry. And so I started seeing campaigning against the fossil fuel industry as mental health care. Now, obviously, that comes with a whole plethora of different struggles, like, burnout, the sort of negative news cycle that you see when you see more and more oil fields being opened up. But in the UK, I work on a campaign called Stop Rosebank. We tried to shut down the Rosebank oil fields in the North Sea, which was being opened by Norwegian state-owned oil giant Equinor. We took them to court in November, and we won our court case in February. That relieved my eco-anxiety quite a lot. And I think, I started reframing it in that sort of systemic change perspective.
They're really, so the root cause is those fossil fuels, the inequality, some people...
Absolutely. I mean, we all have different sort of biological and social makeups that predispose us to different mental struggles. I'm definitely one of those people that's had my fair share of mental struggles in my life, but the thing is, it's not an equal playing field for sure, but this is only being exacerbated by the industries that are destroying the planet, by the social inequalities that we're witnessing. And I think that, everyone on this earth will have struggles, but it's the rate at which this is proliferating, and it's the extent of it that just isn't natural.
And from what you mentioned, so I had my fair share of mental health problems. How do you get, because eco-anxiety, it works paralyzing, so how do you get past the paralyzing effect of the eco-anxiety?
Yeah, emotional paralysis and even physical, it's very much an attribute of a lot of people, especially young people. I mean, I saw a study that came out earlier in February which said that 4 out of 5 primary school children are extremely terrified about the future. And that's quite a sobering...
4 to 5.
4 out of 5.
Yeah.
So it's quite a sobering statistic. And actually, a lot of young people that I've met struggle with that paralysis. They're kept awake at night. They don't know what to do. And I do think that in those instances, when you're dealing with young people, primary educators have to be aware of the extent to which these issues are affecting young people. And I would almost say that we have to try and not lead with a doomist perspective, because that can be incredibly disabling for a lot of people. I understand the reality of what we're facing, but I do think that there is a really unique and tactical way that we have to start talking about climate change that's both, realistic but empowering. And unfortunately, if you're someone who consumes media, it can be extremely depressing. Now, as someone who works, I guess, full-time in climate, I often get asked, oh, did you read that latest news article? Do you hear about this? And yeah, sure, I'm quite aware of the situation that we're in, that I don't feel the need to overconsume doomist rhetoric. I think that can be very dangerous and actually be a hindrance to me and my capacity to act. And so I guess I'm imploring anyone who resonates with that to not dig yourself a deeper hole than the one we're already in. And I think that entails trying to strike that balance between being mindfully informed in a way that informs your capacity to act.
Mindfully informed, and then the capacity
Yeah.
capacity to act. And there again, there's
Yeah.
the importance of being in a group, I guess.
Right. I'm very much motivated by solutions and taking action, and it's taken me time to get there. I'm not going to deny that I sometimes have days where I'm like, oh, this is difficult, and I don't have the motivation to keep going. I think being honest about that is really important. I never want to shy away from the heavy emotions, but I do think that, with this Stop Rosebank campaign, we also shut down another oil field called Cambo in the past. We have a proven track record of success, and it's those things that keep reminding me, like, we've won once, we can do it again. And I say this to most people that I campaign with, and even folks outside of the climate movement: the fossil fuel industry will fall. It's a matter of time. It will fall.
Yeah, I see her applauding. I'll give you some time
it will
for that.
fall. And, for anyone who is part of that industry or otherwise who's campaigning against it, it's a matter of time. Renewables are cheaper than they've ever been. The public conscience on the way that the fossil fuel industry has been denying the science and now delaying it through creating a social license by sponsoring institutions and events. Might I also say, like this one, let's call it out, let's be frank, we have to have these tough conversations. That has to end. And societal consciousness is going to be part of that change. We are seeing people who are mobilizing. We're seeing more and more oil fields being shut down. Yes, we have a rising sort of wave of authoritarianism and fascism that we have to contend with. But I really genuinely believe that as much as that is increasing, so is the resistance. And I really have faith that in my lifetime, we will see the end of fossil fuels.
It's nice to hear such a hopeful message.
There's no choice. Like, it's, I say to people who are in corporations, get behind it or get left behind.
How do you take care of your mental health now? So it's being educated and taking action that you already mentioned. Do you have some tips for the audience as well? How can we take really good care of ourselves?
Yeah, I guess I kind of look at it as a spectrum of, like, how do I take care of myself as an individual versus in community. I think community care is foundational to any form of longevity and well-being. I have a very, very beautiful community through the climate space outside of that, and we really believe in sort of like mutual aid and taking care of one another. And it's no surprise that when you see communities that go through natural disasters, those who are in community, who have those strong community networks, are less likely to develop forms of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's studied, it's scientifically proven, but it's also common sense, right? And so I feel like really being tapped into a network of change makers is what holds me accountable as a climate activist, but also holds me during my darkest days. Insofar as an individual, I subject myself to unpleasant things like cold water swimming, and I subject my friends to it too. And it's something that really keeps me grounded. I have a very big love for the ocean. I mentioned I grew up in a small fishing town. I lived on a boat with my father, and also sailing. The ocean connects me to home in so many ways, and it connects me to myself. And actually, one of my good friends describes the ocean as an extension of her, like, where does the human body start and end? For her, that's such a strange concept to be kind of seen as this soul unit when we're actually part of nature. And I sometimes think about that as well. So I have a very deep relationship with the ocean and with nature.
So go into the wild and get part of a community. And the community is all bottom up, or can we strengthen it? Because we still have a UN General Secretary here. So what would you advise to him?
Every community has the potential to create profound transformation. Whether you want to call it a climate movement, whether you want to call it working in policy, whether you want to call it like your neighborhood or mutual aid. I think it's all relevant. It's all important. We need ground up, top-down approaches. And yeah, in the case of something like eco-anxiety, one of the things I really wanted to emphasize in the book was I didn't want to just see it as this environmental sort of issue. And I wanted to really emphasize that it is intrinsically linked to every form of struggle in society. And I think when you have a broad issue like that, it requires broad solutions and broad communities. I write that access to safe housing and medical care and education is also mental health care. I mean, prevention is the best medicine, right? So yeah, I wanted to create a very holistic approach to it, which also includes the way in which we see it as not solely mental, but actually very somatic and physical as well.
A couple of years ago, you said in Vogue, you were interviewed by Vogue, and you said hope is something you have to cultivate. For all the people here, what are you hoping for?
Yeah.
Last words?
Yeah, I think the reason why I said that is because far too often hope is misconstrued as this kind of passive thing, and as we're seeing with the way things are going politically and also socially, change doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's not something that's passive. It doesn't just happen, and it's not guaranteed, right? Like once change happens in society, even when it's written in law, things can be reversed. And I think it just goes to show that every struggle is a constant uphill battle and effort. And that's why I really believe that even the likes of hope require us to really cultivate the change that we want to see. Yeah, I mentioned Rosebank in Cambo, which we managed to shut down. That gives me hope, for lack of a better word, but also just knowing that people care. And I want to leave you with this study that was done in the UK, which, contrary to popular belief, there's often this opinion that not every sector of society cares about the climate crisis. We're often, pigeonholed, like, oh, only the environmentalists care. There was this nationwide study that showed that every single community, whether working class, whether people of color, middle class, upper, whatever, every single society, regardless of where they stood on the political spectrum, had to care about the environment. Whether or not they call it climate, that's another entire story. And I think for me, the more that we embrace that caring about the climate is a human given, is part of our humanity, the more we can start building bridges and actually creating structures of change that cross political divides, that also create communities where we tackle this together.
Well, we're often too focused on the differences. We should...
Absolutely. And I've spent a lot of time speaking to people. I'm not specifically part of Just Stop Oil, who many of you might have heard of, but I support a lot of my comrades who organize in that space. But I've been asked by radio interviewers or communities in the streets, like, oh, I don't really like Just Stop Oil, I can't get behind them. But when you actually start speaking to them about what they care about, we have exactly the same wants and desires. And I think it's about recognizing that regardless of what political spectrum or class you come from, we actually all want the same things at the end of the day. People want safety and security for their families and loved ones.
Do we all want the same thing? Let's agree. Raise your hands if you do. Do we
That's
all want the same
reassuring.
as Tori? Yeah, Felipe agrees. The rest is still in doubt. Okay, Tori too, I really want to thank you for this discussion.
Andy.
Please clap, put your hands together for Tori too.